Imagine a busy newsroom in Lahore, Pakistan, in the final weeks of 1999. It's the kind of environment where people are used to grim headlines. But when a heavy package arrived at the offices of the Daily Jang, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Inside was a thick diary and a letter that would effectively freeze the heart of the entire nation. A man named Javed Iqbal wasn't asking for money or fame. He was claiming responsibility for the disappearance of 100 children. To wrap your head around that number, think about a standard yellow school bus. Now imagine 2 of those buses, completely full, and everyone on board just vanishes. That is the scale of the tragedy Javed was laying at the feet of the authorities. He didn't just provide a vague confession, he provided a ledger. It was a meticulous, cold-blooded record of names, ages, and dates. This wasn't the work of a chaotic mind. It was the ledger of a bookkeeper. He had documented the lives he took with the same dry precision someone might use to track office supplies. But the most horrifying detail wasn't the list itself. It was what he said he did with the evidence. Javed claimed he had disposed of the remains using large vats of hydrochloric acid. He told the police that if they went to his house at 160 Ravi Road, they wouldn't find any survivors. They would find the physical traces of his actions dissolved into nothingness. He had essentially turned the evidence into a liquid and flushed it into the city's vast, aging sewage system. The letter was a manifesto of resentment. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a man who felt he was settling a score. Javed came from a stable, middle-class background, but a few years prior, he'd had a run-in with the law that left him deeply scarred. He claimed he was wrongfully accused and mistreated while in custody. In his twisted reality, his actions were a way to force the system to look at the trash it ignored every day. He targeted children who lived on the margins, runaways, orphans, and kids who spent their days in the markets and train stations. He knew that in a city of millions, no one would come looking for them. When the authorities finally worked up the nerve to enter the house on Ravi Road, the air was thick with the sharp, metallic sting of chemicals. It was the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and stays in your lungs. Inside, they didn't find a monster's lair. They found a workshop. There were 2 massive blue plastic vats and stacks of small, worn-out shoes. 100 pairs of shoes, neatly piled, like a silent audience. Each pair represented a child who had been lured in with the promise of a meal or a safe place to sleep, only to become a line item in Javed's diary. The investigators found buckets of a dark, corrosive fluid and chains bolted to the floor. The silent witnesses were everywhere. A half-empty container of acid, a discarded toy, a notebook filled with precise calculations of chemical costs. But as the police stood in the middle of this factory of horrors, a chilling realization took hold. The diary was there. The shoes were there. The chemical vats were there. But the man who had invited them to this scene, the individual who had spent months planning this grand reveal, was gone. He had vanished into the crowded streets of Lahore, leaving behind a confession that felt less like a surrender and more like the start of a game. The question wasn't just how he did it, but where he was going next. And more importantly, why did a man who spent so much effort staying hidden suddenly decide he wanted the entire world to watch him? The city was on edge, realizing that while they were looking at the shoes of the missing, the individual responsible was likely somewhere in the crowd, watching them back. The question wasn't just how he did it, but where he was going next. And more importantly, why did a man who spent so much effort staying hidden suddenly decide he wanted the entire world to watch him? The city was on edge, realizing that while they were looking at the shoes of the missing, the individual responsible was likely somewhere in the crowd, watching them back. When the authorities finally pushed through the door of the house at 160 Ravi Road, they didn't find the chaotic mess you'd expect from a typical tragedy. Instead, they walked into what looked like the office of a very meticulous accountant. There was a chilling sense of order to the place. On a small wooden table sat a blue notebook, the kind a student might use for math homework. But this wasn't for school. This was the ledger of a century of souls. Inside that notebook, the subject had recorded the names, the ages, and the dates of 100 different incidents. It was a spreadsheet of human loss. He didn't just write down who they were. He tracked the operational costs. He noted exactly how much he spent on the meals used to lure these children in, usually just a few cents worth of bread or sweets. To put that in perspective, the price of ending a child's story was less than what a person in Lahore would spend on a single cup of tea. It wasn't just a record, it was an audit of a nightmare. This level of organization tells us everything we need to know about his psychology. Most people who commit these types of acts are driven by sudden, uncontrollable impulses. But this individual? He was a middle-class man with a background that required structure. He took the skills of a functioning member of society and weaponized them. He didn't see his victims as people. He saw them as entries in a journal, as data points in a personal war he was waging against the world. And that war had a very specific origin. A few years earlier, he'd had a run-in with the law that left him with deep psychological scars. He felt the system had treated him unfairly, and he harbored a resentment that eventually curdled into something much darker. He decided that since the state failed to protect him, he would show them exactly how little they could protect anyone else. By targeting the most vulnerable children, the runaways and the forgotten who lived near the railway stations, illegally erasing them, he was proving a point. Every name in that ledger was a deliberate jab at the authorities, who had once held him in a cell. But the most disturbing part of the house wasn't the notebook. It was the silent witnesses left behind. Along the walls, there were neat piles of clothing and pairs of shoes, all sorted by size. It looked like a small, makeshift charity shop. Imagine the silence of that room, filled with the everyday items of 100 children who were no longer there to claim them. It made the horror feel incredibly small and intimate. A frayed shoelace here, a stained shirt there. The kind of laundry a mother would normally be washing on a Tuesday afternoon. The individual responsible was essentially playing a high-stakes game of hide and seek where he was the only one who knew the rules. He used a heavy chemical solution, something common in the local textile industry, to ensure that no physical traces were left behind. He was a ghost maker, turning living, breathing humans into nothing but liquid and a line of ink in a blue notebook. He knew the police were coming. He'd even left a note essentially inviting them in to see his work. But as the investigators flipped through page after page of names, they realized something that made their skin crawl. The ledger ended at exactly 100. Not 99, not 101. It was a finished project. The goal had been reached, and the subject had vanished into the humid Lahore night, leaving the city to wonder if the game was truly over, or if he was simply preparing the pages for a second volume. The investigators were standing in a house of shadows, staring at a list of names that the world had forgotten, only to realize that the man who wrote them was still out there, likely watching the blue lights of the police cars from a distance, waiting for the right moment to deliver his final, most public performance. The investigators were standing in a house of shadows, staring at a list of names that the world had forgotten, only to realize that the man who wrote them was still out there. likely watching the blue lights of the police cars from a distance, waiting for the right moment to deliver his final, most public performance. The air in the house at 110 Ravi Road didn't just smell like old dust or neglect. It had a sharp, clinical bite to it. The kind of scent that hits the back of your throat and stays there. In the center of the room stood two massive blue plastic containers. These weren't just for storage. They were the centerpieces of a meticulous, dark assembly line. Investigators soon realized that the liquid inside was a powerful industrial corrosive, specifically chosen for its ability to break down organic matter until nothing, not even a trace of physical evidence, remained. It was a method of disposal that felt more like a cold chemistry experiment than a crime scene. The sheer scale of the operation was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Most people who commit these types of acts do so in a heat of passion or through chaotic impulses. Not this individual. He was a bookkeeper by nature, and he treated these tragedies like a balance sheet. Inside the house, the police found a ledger. It was a terrifyingly organized document where he had recorded the names, ages, and even the dates of the incidents. But the detail that really stuck in the craw of the lead investigators was the financial breakdown. He had calculated the cost of the chemicals used for each person. It came out to roughly 100 rupees per individual. To put that in perspective, at the time, that was less than the price of a modest family meal. That was the value he assigned to a human life, the price of a quick lunch. This wasn't just about hiding what he'd done. From a psychological standpoint, this was about total erasure. Years earlier, when he had been caught in the gears of a broken legal system and felt mistreated by the authorities, he felt like he had been stripped of his humanity. He felt invisible, discarded by the state. In his twisted logic, he decided to reflect that treatment back onto the world. He targeted children who were already on the fringes, the ones the city ignored, the ones sleeping in train stations or working for scraps in the markets. By reducing them to a liquid state and disposing of them through the sewage system, he was literally washing away the people he felt society had already forgotten. He was playing a god of the gutters, deciding who deserved to exist and who should simply vanish into the plumbing. The investigators also found a collection of clothing and small personal items, neatly stacked. It was a trophy room of the most heartbreaking kind. Each pair of shoes or discarded sweater was a silent witness to a life that had been cut short. The precision of it all pointed to a mind that was dangerously calm. He wasn't a monster hiding under a bridge. He was a man who lived among his neighbors, someone who could look you in the eye and give you the time of day while carrying the weight of 100 tragedies in his pocket. But as the search teams combed through the house, they realized the individual responsible had left them a roadmap. He had left the ledger and the evidence as a taunt. He wanted the world to see his work, but he wanted to be the one to narrate the ending. Just as the police were preparing to launch a massive manhunt, a local newspaper office received a package that would change the trajectory of the entire case. It contained a detailed confession, but it wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a challenge. He was ready to come forward, but only on his own terms. He had one final move to make, a public display that would turn the legal system on its head and leave the public wondering if justice was even possible for a man who had already decided his own fate. The package delivered to that newspaper office wasn't just a confession. It was a slap in the face to every officer who had ignored the reports of missing kids for years. Inside was a diary, photos, and a list, neatly numbered from 1 to 100. Imagine the chill in that newsroom as they realized they weren't looking at a hoax, but a meticulous catalog of a city's lost generation. This individual didn't just take their lives, he documented the cost of each one, down to the last rupee spent on a meal to lure them in. We're talking about a person who viewed these children as nothing more than line items in a ledger of revenge. When he finally walked into that newspaper office to surrender on December 30th, 1999, he wasn't trembling. He was arrogant. He sat there and explained his logic like he was talking about a routine business transaction. He told them he wanted to make 100 mothers cry because of what he felt the police had done to him during a previous encounter with the law. It's a terrifying look into the mind of someone who is completely disconnected from the concept of human value. To him, the children weren't people. They were tools to be used in a sick game of one-upmanship against the state. The search of his property was like stepping into a nightmare that had been scrubbed clean. There were 2 massive blue vats. The chemistry involved was calculated. He used hydrochloric acid to ensure that the physical traces would simply disappear into the city's waste system. When investigators arrived, they didn't find traditional evidence. They found a ghostly residue. They found a pile of clothes that belonged to children who had been missing for months, sometimes years. Imagine a pile of 100 pairs of shoes, all different sizes, all representing a child who thought they were finally getting a warm meal or a place to sleep. That's the detail that sticks with you: the shoes. Each pair is a silent witness to a life that was discarded as if it never mattered. The legal fallout was just as surreal as the crime itself. The judge, perhaps feeling the weight of a nation's fury, handed down a sentence that sounded like something out of a dark legend. He ordered that the individual be dealt with in the exact same manner he had treated the children, in a public square. It was a sentence meant to provide a sense of ultimate justice, but it only sparked more debate about the ethics of the legal system. However, the world never saw that sentence carried out. On the morning of October 8, 2001, guards found both the subject and his accomplice, a young man who had been drawn into his orbit, unresponsive in their cells. They had ended their own lives just before the final judgment could be meted out. The timing was too perfect for many to believe. It felt like a final act of control. By choosing his own exit, he robbed the families of even the cold comfort of a state-sanctioned conclusion. He maintained his power until the very last second. Today, this case remains a scar on the soul of the city. There are no monuments for those 100 children. The physical evidence literally washed away through the sewers. But the story persists as a warning about what happens when a society ignores its most vulnerable. Those children weren't just lost. They were invisible long before they ever met him. He didn't just exploit their bodies. He exploited the fact that no one was looking for them. And that's the hardest part to swallow. The idea that a person could hide 100 tragedies in the middle of a crowded city, simply because the world had already turned its back on them. The ghost in the sewage system isn't just one man. It's the memory of 100 names that the system forgot to protect until it was far too late.